Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest edition of PAX Live on Facebook here on PAX News' Facebook page. Today, we'll be discussing reopening the world. What will it take to restart European and Asia Pacific travel? It's been difficult times last couple of weeks, if not month. So, what does the future hold for these two regions of the world, and when will Canadian travelers be able to visit again Europe and Asia? So, to join in this discussion today will be Alan Law, who's director for the Pacific Asia Travel Association, PATA, Canada chapter, and also director of sales and marketing for GLP Worldwide. I'll be joining him in a second or so. And speaking on the situation in Europe is Miguel Gallego, who is head of marketing for the European Travel Commission, the ETC, which is actually an association of national tourism organizations based in Brussels. So, actually, without further ado, let me see if I've got them both on the line. I believe so. Alan, can you hear me good? Yes?
I can hear you.
Excellent. Miguel, thank you for being there. What time is it over in Europe right now?
It's 8 p.m. here in Brussels.
Well, thank you for being with us, and thank you everyone who is on online right now. I see the numbers going up steadily. It's great. As usual, if this is your first time on this PAX Live, we invite you to put in your comments or your questions in the feed, and I will make sure to relay those comments and questions to either Alan or Miguel, depending on the nature of the topic that's being raised. So. Um, how things have been, I guess, over the last couple of weeks have impacted with COVID-19. I'm curious to hear perhaps from you, Alan. How has your role changed? If we look specifically, because you're also head of marketing for GLP Worldwide, but at PATA, how have things changed with the last couple of weeks? Has the role of the organization evolved, or how have you seen things changing in the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, I mean, a lot has changed. I find myself using that term new normal a lot. I guess we've accepted that there is no going back to the old normal. Everything we know is going to change after this, just like it changed after 9/11. Personally, my role has changed from sales and marketing to more of communications and PR. Generally, I'm used to working remotely, but I'm usually on the road or in an airport, never really at home. So that's a strange experience. I came into the office today to do this just to avoid all the distractions at home. But day to day, yeah, I'm just pretty much trying to keep our stakeholders informed of what's happening, what we plan to do, and really how we're reacting to information that's been changing daily. By stakeholders, I mean everyone from our company's executives to our frontline staff, from travel advisors to travelers, and of course our international partners.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's been a real change. It's not so much about selling or marketing anything now, but more about staying connected, sharing and learning about current best practices, exchanging ideas. I've started making some YouTube travel videos of some of my recent trips. So if anybody wants to check it out, you can check out Travel for Travelers on YouTube. Over at PATA, we haven't changed our objectives. Our primary goal is to support and connect the industry, and that's what we'll continue to do. It's more important now than ever to really
Mhm.
stay connected and updated. What we'll do is we'll continue to advocate on behalf of the travel industry, provide valuable forecasts and analysis to help members make decisions in planning for a reopening. In fact, last month, PATA HQ released 39 destination reports, and these are forecasts complete with updates in response to COVID-19. So I think what a lot of what's being done today is gathering and sharing and processing information, and there is a lot of noise out there. So I think the key to being successful going forward is being able to reject what isn't relevant and apply what's useful toward future planning of reopening.
And that's going to be interesting because we will talk about the reopening and some what is open, what's not, and how we're dealing with that situation in Asia. But first, Miguel, tell us from the European Travel Commission standpoint, how have things changed over the course of the last couple of weeks with the COVID-19 situation?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first thing, thank you very much for the opportunity to join this discussion. Obviously, my role changed significantly the past weeks, apart from the obvious things of having to work from home and all the virtual meetings and calls. My job as head of marketing had to change. I mean, we're not able to do any marketing campaigns or any promotion at that time. So the first weeks, we've been very busy rescheduling all our marketing program for the year. A lot of partners management and stakeholders management that became very important, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. Most of the activities that we do are cooperative marketing activities. So there's a lot of partners involved, and with all the uncertainty at the beginning, a lot of stakeholders management was required. Also, our priorities shifted a bit towards sharing insights, research, and the European Travel Commission produces a lot of valuable market research. We are monitoring constantly trends, travel sentiment towards Europe. And we obviously felt there was a strong need for insights and information to assess the impact of the pandemic. So we have been hosting a lot of webinars, trying to share as much information as possible with destinations, with the industry. Also, a lot of talks, conversations, trying to listen to the needs of the sector, of those small and medium enterprises and operators that are suffering the crisis, and how can we actually support them. So listening a lot to their stories. And we also have been advocating a lot, talking to the European institutions, different governments across Europe, trying to explain them and communicate the impact that the pandemic was having on the industry, that they realize that the sector needs to be supported because many people are suffering, are losing jobs. So trying to communicate that, and also advising in the best way possible of the different measures and to be taken in order to guarantee a coordinated response. So to sum up, not very much of destination marketing as I used to do, but a lot of talking to partners and trying to share insights as much as possible.
And essentially the marketing is no longer perhaps storytelling, but you're more in the educational, the webinars, the what's open, what measures are being taken, I guess, is what I'm hearing both from you, Alan, and Miguel, which is pretty something we're seeing here in Canada as well, where we need to sort of educate and reassure about what's being done in our respective countries. And on that topic, maybe Alan, can you tell us maybe some of the destinations in Asia that have been doing a fairly good job, in your opinion, in getting that, like handling the pandemic and getting things, turning things around for hosting tourism? Because tourism has restarted in some areas. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, like we're talking about, I think the regions that handle the virus well would be the first to welcome international tourists. And as you mentioned, some have sort of opened for domestic travel. Just a few places like New Zealand, they moved quickly to shut down the country. They were declared COVID-free, but I think a few imported cases recently from the UK. But other than that, they have a good grasp on the situation. Taiwan obviously learned something from SARS about 20 years ago. They quickly closed their borders. The government used contact tracing and even mobile SIM tracking to identify and ensure that those in quarantine were actually following the rules. Businesses were kept open by using precautionary measures like taking temperatures and providing sanitizer before anyone could go in. It's because they had the buy-in of the people. They were willing to sacrifice some privacy in order to gain control of the spread very quickly. Then a place like Singapore also took an aggressive approach, right, to contact tracing. They were checking people's IDs at supermarkets, and in addition to widespread testing. South Korea has also been in the news, and they obviously learned a lot from MERS and H1N1, and they used a similar sort of early response that has really helped the country maintain a very low case count at about 0.02% of the population. So that's only 12,000 cases out of about 50 million people. Oh. And they managed to do this without closing their economy. Recently, there's been reports of a second wave, but that's, I think, a couple of days ago was 17 infections across the entire country. And that's being controlled quite rapidly with robust contact tracing. So even though there's a potential for a secondary outbreak, they're able to keep that under control very quickly, showing that they can respond effectively to contain new cases. Another good example, of course, is Hong Kong. They took a lot of experience from SARS. and took aggressive measures early. So other than a handful of imported cases recently, it's been several weeks since they recorded any cases of local transmission. And there's protocols in place. So currently Hong Kong, there are safeguard protocols across the hospitality industry, and these are focused on recovery and how they're going to adapt to the new normal. Vietnam, Thailand, Bali, also worth mentioning. They've all done great in containing the virus and minimizing casualties, again, using extensive contact tracing and widespread testing. And of course, obviously, things are still constantly changing. I mean, things could be changing now as we're talking, but I think the countries that responded well, as I mentioned above, to the outbreak, would be the first ones to be ready for international travelers first.
Yeah, and we'll be talking about who are those travelers, and I guess this will be our next topic. But Miguel, I'd be curious to hear from your standpoint in Europe. Do we have a similar scenario of what Alan just explained, or how have you been things playing out from countries that have been doing a good job at sort of returning from the pandemic, if we could put it that way?
Yeah, well, the situation differs from country to country in Europe, obviously, but overall there has been a big improvement over the past couple of weeks. Countries, for example, just to name a few, like Italy, which was one of the first ones that has to go into lockdown because of COVID-19, that suffers the most because of the pandemic. They actually were also the first European destination to reopen to inter-European travelers earlier this month. Then, as of last Monday, most of European countries opened their borders to intra-European citizens. So inter-European travel from, for example, Germany to Italy is allowed at the moment. Other countries like France, Belgium, Poland, for example, have also already reopened their borders. Of course, I'm speaking about intra-European travel. The borders for non-European citizens still remain closed, at least till the beginning of next month.
Okay.
But as I said, the situation has been very different. So there are some countries that didn't really close during the pandemic. For example, Portugal and even Ireland, they still allow incoming trips. Although anybody arriving in these countries will need to go through a quarantine, but they were never really closed to travelers.
Yeah. So what is the situation for Canadians who want to go to Europe right now? And I guess I'll have that question for Alan as well. You would have to do a mandatory quarantine for 14 days unless you're European. Is that how it works, Miguel?
Well, there are two elements to take into account. First, of course, whether Canadians are allowed to travel abroad or not. So until that travel advisory is lifted, Canadians are not really advised to travel abroad. And then from the destination side, the question is whether they're allowed to get in.
Yeah.
As it's explained right now, across the Schengen zone, which is an ensemble of the majority of European countries, with the exception of the UK and Ireland, incoming travel to the Schengen zone is for non-European citizens and for non-essential travel is not allowed at the moment until the 1st of July. Now, most of the destinations, European countries, have been asked by the European authorities to come to find a consensus of a list of countries for which the travel restrictions will be lifted, based on a series of criteria, which includes was the situation of the pandemic in the destination of origin, if it is a similar level as it is right now in Europe, whether that country has measures in place to control possible infections upon departure and even during the trip, and also based on some reciprocity, in the sense that if the Schengen zone opens to one origin market, travelers from Europe should also be allowed to travel to that destination. So these are the principles. The countries are right now asked to find some consensus, because it's important to remember, and I know for Canadian travelers, it's also important. Many of them, when they come to Europe, they tend to visit more than one destination.
For sure.
And that's the big advantage that we have in Europe. This free of movement within the Schengen zone. So a traveler arriving in Germany, for example, might want to continue its trip to France. So we need to make sure that that is actually possible, that
Yeah, a
person
lot of open
will be
jobs,
allowed.
one place exiting from another, of course. Yeah.
Exactly. So the situation, just to sum up, is as of today, is that Canadian travelers are still not allowed to Europe. But we are expecting some updates very, very shortly. As I said, the situation now is up to the 1st of July, which is
Right.
next Wednesday. So probably in the next couple of days, we'll have some updates.
Yeah, for sure we'll be reporting on this on paxnews.com. Alan, I'm curious to hear from your standpoint. What's the status for Canadians who want to travel to Asia or various countries in Asia at this point in time, as far as you know?
Yeah, I mean, to date, it's quite similar to what Miguel had mentioned. I mean, there's always the Canadian restrictions. We can't leave, first of all. But for the most part, most of the Asian destinations do require a 14-day quarantine if you're coming in. And that's for business travel, and certain places are allowed. But there's a whole set of other issues too, because many Asian countries require Canadians to have a visa, and they're not issuing those visas right now. So yeah, at the moment, it's not happening, but things are changing. There's timelines for reopening. There's discussions at all different levels. I think very soon we'll be getting a little bit more information as to who can go where. I mean, there's, as you guys have all heard, there's the travel bubbles between certain places. Canada is up in the discussion for being able to control the virus well, so they may be included at some point to be allowed to travel into certain destinations. But for now, the movement is it's not feasible. Even if you go there, you have to spend 14 days in quarantine, and then when you come back, you have to spend another 14 days in
Now,
quarantine. So
Alan,
yeah,
it's interesting. You talked about visas and the fact they're not being released right now. Is there a fear maybe that there will be a backlog? And this is something we've heard, for example, for the U.S., where they're saying in the U.S. they aren't doing any new passports. It's been a couple of months, so that when they do reopen, let's say between U.S. and Canada, there's going to be such a backlog of a couple of months. Is that something that you think might play negatively for Canadians or North Americans that want to go? And same thing for Europe, I guess. I mean, maybe there's less requirements for visas there, but is that something that sort of is a threat out there for midterm travel?
I would say yes and no. It depends on which country we're talking about, because a lot of a lot of the visa processing, it's e-visas. You can do it online, or it's visa on arrival. So it kind of happens as you go. So there may be a backlog depending on the way that it's being processed. But yeah, there's just so many factors right now. I think as soon as they open up the visas, things will run smoothly. They've got that pent up demand. I think they'll step it up just to be able to process everything in a timely manner.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we're talking about visas, but also airlines. Airlines have a big role to play, and they're announcing. And I think Transat a week or two ago announced as of July 23rd, they're going to be flying to 23 new destinations. Some of them were actually in North America, Caribbean, and Europe. So, Miguel, is that what roles do you think airlines can play, and what are other variables in play that can help getting people inspired to travel? Because until we have, of course, the permission and those dates confirmed, for now it's only just like a dream, short term. But how do you see that role being played out by some of the stakeholders, such as airlines and maybe airports or tour operators?
Yeah, well, connectivity will be key to resume travel to Europe from overseas markets. Obviously, most of the Canadians driving into Europe do it by air. So recovering slowly that very good connectivity that we have enjoyed over the past months will be key. Europe has been seeing a steady increase in arrivals of Canadian travelers over the past years, and that was partly due to this increased air connectivity. So, of course, until those air connections are reestablished, we will not be able to go back to where we used to be.
Right.
Then, of course, is the element of consumer confidence and the capacity of the airlines to make sure that they have put in place all the protocols necessary for allowing a safe travel from the point of origin to Europe in this case. The European Commission, they published in mid-May some guidelines, recommendations for the industry as a whole. This included also airlines and airports, some recommendations on health and safety protocols to make sure that the travelers are capable to travel in a safe manner, based on a series of principles, most importantly, trying to keep social distancing, so limited capacity in checking areas, and when recovering your luggage in waiting areas, for example, as well. Important to mention, though, is that capacity of the flights was not impacted by these recommendations or guidelines. They were having a lot of discussions going on whether airlines will be required to, for example, leaving empty the middle seat. This was not part of the.
There's talk about mandatory masks, of course, being worn on board.
Exactly, wearing masks, washing your hands. Also, we also appeal to the responsibility of the traveler to behave in a responsible way. But yeah, coming back to your question, for the recovery at least of Europe as a destination, recovering the very good air connectivity that we have had will be key. But also allow me to say that this also might provide an opportunity for developing new ways of transport within Europe, such as rail travel, for example. We have a very good connectivity in Europe, and there was a lot of discussion before COVID-19. We were all talking about over-tourism, about climate change, on maybe the impact.
The flight shaming aspect as well, yes.
Exactly, and this is probably now likely to become even more important than ever. So I think the pandemic also provides an opportunity to develop and further promote the use of other means of transport, at least within Europe, as we can enjoy a very good infrastructure that allows that.
That's interesting. Well, actually, we got one or two questions here that I'd like to bring up. Deb asks, do you think that a traveler will need to have negative COVID-19 test results in order to travel anywhere now? And I guess we could say some kind of a medical certificate or some kind of, is that something, and we don't, no one's got a magic wand here, but Alan, do you think this is something that might be required, that there will be maybe temperature testing and things like that, or will we go maybe a bit further? And I think that's an actual question because it could be a requirement. Alan, what do you think?
Yeah, no, that is an excellent question. I mean, I'm not in a position to answer on behalf of the country, but yeah, I think that's a fantastic idea. I know that the Emirates airline, they had already implemented an instant test before you're allowed to board the plane. But I think to have that certification would make sense. I mean, if you're certified COVID-free within 72 hours of your flight or something like that, that allows you to leave your country or enter into a new country. That I think would make sense. But whether or not that is possible in terms of privacy and whatnot, that really depends
that is a big
on which country. Yeah, but again, it's like applying for a visa. If you want to go there, you got to do it, kind of thing.
Right. Miguel, what do you think? Is that something also you think for Europe that could be feasible in the short or medium term, or perhaps the same privacy matters that were raised by Alan would apply?
Yeah. Well, at the moment, that's not required, and personally, I don't think it will. What is required at the moment in most European airports is that the passenger is required to fill a short form upon arrival, with just the objective to keep some track of the point of origin of that person, and especially in case that an infection is detected in the flight where that passenger was, that this can be quickly be traced and be warned, and that person might be requested to go into quarantine. So they're not requested to prove that they don't have the virus or that they didn't have it, but there are some measures in place to try to keep some control of the people passing through the airports and airlines in the event of an infection that could put in danger that passenger.
Interesting. Now, before we were talking about the fact that Canadians can't leave, but there's Danielle made a little precision on that. She says Canadians actually can leave. It's just not advisable, which is an important nuance, which of course has consequences on travel insurance. And can you comment on the $3,000 US deposit Cambodia is now asking, apparently? Why not condition of granting a visa to showing proof of a test? Is that something that might be required? And I'm not sure if you're familiar with that deposit that's being required, Alan.
No, I'm not familiar with that. I can take a look at it, but I have heard of such things like that. For example, proof of insurance for X amount that you can actually afford to take care of yourself should something happen, and that's happening. That's common. But the $3,000 US, I haven't heard of it, but it makes sense that they're asking for something like that right now until they figure out maybe a vaccine or whatnot, just so that they know that you can afford to take care of yourself if something was to happen.
And it could actually be a business opportunity. And I'm not sure, Miguel, but it wasn't it Iceland that announced that a couple of weeks ago. And I'm not sure if it was an urban legend, but that they were saying that they would actually you could pay. You have to have a testing upon arrival in Iceland, but if you actually paid, you could have it expedited like in 24 hours, and it would be like an incentive. And I think there's also another country in Europe that said, well, if you do fall sick during your stay, we'll make sure you're it's being covered. Is that I mean, is that something that we could see as a possibility from some smaller destinations to say, you know what, we ensure you that you're not going to fall sick while at our destination to entice people to come and visit? Of course, within the Schengen zone if you're in Europe, or within the Asia Pacific, zone if you're there. Miguel, what do you think?
Yeah, indeed. The two examples that you mentioned are right. Iceland and some regions in Italy,
Right.
they announced as a measure to incentivize travel to these destinations again that they will be facilitating for those that want to be tested, or that they feel they need to be tested because they might have been in risk to be exposed to somebody that has the virus. So they would provide support on getting access to those tests.
That's interesting. So at this point in time, how do we see things happening for a successful reopening? What's missing? You're going to say, of course, perhaps that there's an official announcement, but what do you think is missing before we can start selling Asia Pacific and Europe again? Alan, from an Asia standpoint, what are some of the elements that need to be in place so that we can really get the ball moving with this?
I mean, it's in Asia. I mean, throughout Asia Pacific, it's already started with a gradual reopening now to domestic travelers. So there's the discussion of the travel bubbles, as we mentioned, allowing the select countries to travel within the region. We know that people want to travel, but many are just waiting for the right circumstances. Like, what are those circumstances? Even with the pent-up demand, I imagine travelers might not easily be persuaded to travel internationally. To some extent, they're going to need to see actual physical changes made to make travel safer and still practical. So extensive hygiene protocols. An important one is flexible booking, just to have the peace of mind and that's going to be very important for booking travel in the future. Health and safety, of course, is going to be a top priority for when people can travel again. And this is going to play a big part where people are going to choose to go. So every service provider, from restaurant, attraction, accommodation, they're going to be assessed based on cleanliness. For example, the Hong Kong International Airport, they have a full body disinfection and sanitizing procedure. I mean, I think this is only currently for staff, but you can see where this is going, right? They've applied the antimicrobial coating basically on every surface and touch point. They have cleaning robots that are deployed 24 hours to sterilize everything. Yeah, the protocols are going to be important. Many airlines, hotels, destinations have already implemented their own policies, but what's coming next, or actually in progress, I think Miguel had mentioned earlier, is globally accepted protocols, right? So the WTTC has a safe travels protocols for travel-related industries. USTOA, CATO, and ETOA have recently created a set of safety guidelines. And these are all protocols that are widely accepted, taking into account WHO and other public health guidelines. So I think it would be prudent for travel advisors to look for supplier partners who are complying with these guidelines. And these are going to be important things to have in place in anticipation of reopening.
Yeah, and the crowds that are watching this Facebook Live, it's a lot of travel agents, counselors. I mean, what can we say to them to help them sell the destination and get ready for what's to come next? So, Miguel, I'd be curious to hear your perspective on that. I mean, what are some of the ways that we can keep clients interested while we're still waiting for these announcements to make? I mean, Alan pointed out a couple of good things with regards to health and sanitary procedures, but what else could we put into place that will help advisors, travel agents, get the pent up demand remain and get people to book as soon as we can?
Well, for travel advisors, I would definitely recommend that they have a look at the new website that we made online last week. It's called reopen.europa.eu.
Okay.
It's a comprehensive website where they will find all the information of the different restrictions and protocols in place in the different countries of the European Union. I think this tool will prove very valuable for operators to know exactly what is the situation in the different destinations. The information is updated on a regular basis as the situation evolves. It's also available in different languages, so this is a very useful tool for travel advisors. Then I also recommended that they just use this time to update themselves, educate also themselves. And in that regard, the destinations, the different tourism offices have been doing an excellent job with different webinars and tools targeted specifically for travel advisors to try to provide the latest information about what was new in their destination. So just use this time to catch up and learn as much as possible of the destinations and take advantage of this opportunity that it is provided, because the appetite is there. We have been monitoring demand since the very beginning of the pandemic. Of course, there were cancellations and flights were postponed, but people are still searching. So the appetite for traveling is there. So I'm confident that we will rebound. Destinations have also put together a lot of very immersive and virtual experiences, especially to keep that people dreaming about their vacation. And are having excellent virtual experiences from many different destinations and attractions across Europe. So take advantage of all those different tools that are made available for travel advisors and for consumers to still continue dreaming about their future trips.
Well, that's good. And I just saw that in the feed. Our friend Pascal from Swiss Tourism actually shared the reopen.europe.eu link. So we'll make sure that that's already there. We're already beyond the half-hour mark. Time flies when we do these things. Perhaps, and we've seen a lot of the comments and questions. I think we were mostly addressed. Final words of wisdom, Alan. What's next, I guess, for Asia Pacific, and how do you see things unfolding with what we know now?
I mean, based on the reaction, as we mentioned earlier, of the responses to the virus of some of the Asia Pacific countries, they're doing well. They're containing things well. They're reopening to domestic travel, so there's hope. It's a confident step forward. Just to throw in there, for example, Shanghai and Hong Kong Disneyland, they've recently reopened.
Right.
So with limited admission, of course, but if they can operate in such a crowded setting and still operate successfully, that instills confidence that it is possible, that it can be controlled, and we can still operate something like a theme park during times like this. For the travel advisor, I think the key now is to work with a reputable tour operator who can offer flexibility in their booking conditions. You can be comfortable on promoting tours for later in 2021, but you want to still keep an eye out for some incentives in Q3, Q4 2020, because as countries start to open up, there's going to be some good deals out there. I mean, we have to be realistic that the people have this whole crisis it's going to be followed by an economic stagnation, and that's going to limit the ability of people to travel, even if there are no restrictions. So costs are going to play a big part. And many governments are looking at offering incentives for travelers. So obviously starting with the domestic traveler, and then for international travelers, I know, from hotel nights to air credits. So keep an eye out for those type of things to help, drive some bookings. Stay educated, as Miguel said earlier, like stay educated through reliable sources, government sites. You can contact us at PATA, and of course rely on trade media like PAX News, but just don't rely on a YouTube documentary as a source of information. You may want to take on a role as PR communication for now. Stay in touch with your clients through email, social media, even a good old phone call. See how they feel, get some feedback, exchange ideas. So when they're ready to book, they're going to come to you. I think a big part of selling travel in the future, we talked about this, is not just talking about how great the destination is, but including details on how to keep you safe while you're there.
Yeah.
That's important for them to know. And like, where will it be safe to travel? I know it adds a new level of complexity to your role as a travel advisor, but to now become an expert on health and safety policies as well as travel restrictions. But it is important to know that when this is over, new opportunities will emerge for those who can adapt.
True. And before I go to Miguel, I have one last question for you, Alan. There was I think it was a hoax that was online for like 2 or 3 weeks ago that Japan was going to pay travelers to go to the country. True or not true? Fake news?
Fake news. Hashtag fake news.
Hashtag fake news. Just so we're clear. Perfect.
Yes.
Miguel, last words of wisdom from the European standpoint. What's what's the lay of the land for you, and what can we remember from today's talk for us to move forward?
Well, very similar. I would just encourage people to remain positive. I'm a positive person, so I'm confident that the worst of this pandemic is behind us. We will reopen, and we will reopen soon. And just to guarantee you that you will be ready when the time is right. The protocols are already in place. So just to guarantee that European destinations will be ready, and really looking forward to welcoming Canadian travelers again, of course, in a responsible way.
Well, thank you very much, both Alan and Miguel, for staying up later than expected for doing this night or evening shift for us. So much appreciated.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and likewise, thank you, Alan, for coming into the office today to do this. So it's great. We hope the folks appreciate it. We got a lot of people who asked some questions and commented, so it was great. And folks, PAX News, we look forward to seeing you on a future PAX Live. If not, follow us on paxnews.com. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.